about part 3 of The One Thing by Gary Keller. This is our One Book July 2020 read-along. This one's a little bit longer again. Okay, I have like an extra page of notes compared to part 2 video, so let's hope I don't need a drink of water during it because I didn't bring one. So, part 3 is extraordinary results. He says that using this concept of the one thing is kind of predicated on purpose, priority, and productivity. Your big one thing is your purpose, and our small one thing is the priority action you have to take next to achieve it. So you want to use your purpose like a compass. He says purpose, priority, and productivity are like an iceberg, and if you guys have read or heard or watched anything about icebergs, you know, 1/9 of an iceberg is above water. That's the productivity part. That's the part that everybody can see, right? But purpose and priority are what push that productivity to the surface. So on an iceberg, what's at the surface is the tip, right? It's being buoyed up in the water by the other 2/9, yeah, math major, right? Right. What's beneath the water is 8/9 of the iceberg, and it's all being buoying up that 1/9 of the iceberg. That's the part that you actually see. Your purpose and your priority are pushing your productivity to the surface. So chapter 13 is about purpose. It's about living with purpose. So he says, live with purpose, live by priority, live for productivity. Our purpose sets our priority, and our priority determines the productivity that our actions produce. And he also talks about happiness in this, because a lot of people, myself included, I automatically in my brain, I link those. I link living with a purpose to being happy, to happiness, or to like a basic foundational level of happiness. And he says if you become more engaged in what we do by finding ways to make our life more meaningful, that's the best way to get lasting happiness. So if you're living with a purpose, you kind of naturally start to become more engaged in what you're doing and how you're spending time to support that purpose. And that makes things more meaningful. And when you have meaningful, when you feel more fulfilled, you tend to feel happier. So he talks about the power of purpose, and that when you have a purpose, you know what matters to you already, and your daily actions start to align with that. When you start to live with that kind of mindset, clarity actually starts to come faster, which means you have more conviction in your direction, right? So your direction becomes very clear to you, and you're more determined to be in that direction and pursue that line of action. That helps you make faster decisions, which often means you end up with the best choices, which gives you the best opportunity for the best experiences, right? So it's like starting with this foundational level of living with purpose kind of is a good foundation. It sets you up well to keep going down that road. And there is, as I mentioned in my last video, there's a website called theonething.com, and there is part of that called, it's at theonething.com/mypurpose, and that is about finding what that purpose is for you. And he does warn you though, you know, all of this on paper or in theory is really great and sounds really positive, but purpose is not all rainbows and fluffy kittens and unicorns, and you know, having a purpose and living with that purpose, living through that purpose, helps you maintain a healthy perspective when things get tough, because things are going to get tough. First of all, it's life, right? And secondly, ask anybody who has pursued something big in their life, and they will all tell you exactly the same thing, and that is that it got messy, and it got tough, and it got challenging, and there were unforeseen difficulties. And making sure that you're seeing those things and everything through this filter of a purpose that you fully support and believe in helps you stay the course when challenges do come along, because they will come along. So in summary, he says, number 1, happiness happens on the way to fulfillment. Number 2, discover your big why, so discover that purpose. And number 3, if you're not sure of an answer, if you're not sure of what to do, and this kind of ties into what's on the website at theonething.com, he says, absent an answer, pick a direction. Pick a direction and start going. Don't go too far, you know, but pick a direction and see how you feel about it. See what starts to happen around you. Because that's better than staying inert and doing nothing, because then you're not at least whittling down what the wrong paths of pursuit are. Chapter 14 is live by priority. So he says purpose tells you where to go, priority tells you what to do to get there. And he calls this goal setting to the now. That's how you decide what your priorities are. So this is basically, to me, it's like a distilling down, okay? And it starts very big picture. This is your someday goal, more than 5 years out, okay? And you take your someday goal and you ask yourself, what one thing can I do in the next 5 years to be on the right path to achieve that? And then you decide what that answer is. And then you look at your 5-year goal and say, what's the one thing I can do this year to be on the path to achieve that? And then you go, okay, so 5-year goal, that gives me an answer for this year. Now, if based on my 1-year goal, what's the one thing I can do this quarter to achieve that? And you keep going down through the year, to the quarters, to the months, to the weeks, to today, okay? And you get down to what one thing can I do today that will support my weekly goal. At the end of the week, okay, next week, what one thing can I do this week that will support my monthly goal? Do you see how it kind of filters back up again? So it all builds, but you're distilling it down from this very high level someday goal, right? That supports your purpose, or fulfills maybe your purpose. And I know this is a hole that I have fallen into so many times in my life, and that is trying to connect what I need to do today with my someday goal way down the road. I just get lost. If I start at this end of it, at the small end, at the today level, and think, what can I do today to achieve that way in the future, I just get lost. It's kind of like when I sit down to brainstorm, like I talked about in the last video. My brain just locks up and I can't think of anything. So kind of akin to the idea of starting with questions when you're brainstorming, well, start with the other end. It's kind of like when I was a kid, my grandpa taught me, we used to spend a lot of time out there in the summer. So we had, when it was raining or whatever, we had like word searches and mazes and, books of puzzles to do. And I was really struggling to do this maze one day, and he told me to start at the end and work my way back to the beginning. And that had never occurred to me. I think I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And he was like, no, start at the end and work your way back. You'll be surprised how easy it is. And it was so easy, right? It's kind of that same concept of, if you're looking at something from the start and you can't see how to get all the way to the finish, well, start at the finish and see what you need to do to get down to where you are today, then do that thing, okay? So when you think like that, when you start at the high level and are boom, 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 and I'm not saying you start at that high level every day to figure out what you want to do today. He does talk about planning these things out, so you don't have to do that every single day, because that would take up a lot of time every single day. But that connects you today to all of your tomorrows. And I love the idea of that, because it does make that bridge between what I'm doing today and that someday goal. But the work is already done because I've started there and worked my way back to this point instead. So in summary, number 1, he says there can only be one thing, because the word priority actually means one, not your best priority, your top 3 priorities. Your priority means one. End of discussion. Number 2, goal set to the now, which we talked about. And number 3, near and dear to all of our hearts, put pen to paper, which I love. Chapter 15 is live for productivity. So he says productivity with the right purpose is life-changing. And his big key to being as productive as he possibly can is something I'm sure a ton of us are familiar with, and it's time blocking. You can't use more time as a means of getting more done, okay? Everybody has a finite amount of time. So you need to find a way to be as productive as possible with the time you do have. It's kind of, to us, it feels like the age-old question, right? So he says if you block off time in your schedule and only focus on your one thing during that time, meaning everything else, distractions, anything else has to wait. And he says, and that has to be kind of guarded, okay? You have to block that time off and then defend it. He says, quote, time blocking works on the premise that a calendar records appointments but doesn't care who those appointments are with, okay? So you're making an appointment with yourself to tackle your one thing, right? I am gonna cough. Told you I should have brought water. So he says that what he's discovered about time blocking is to time block in this order is the most effective for him overall. Number 1, block off your time off. Number 2, block off time for your one thing. And then number 3, block off your planning time. And he says you block off your time off first because resting is as important as working. You cannot work with an empty tank. We talked about this back in the introduction. Number 2, your one thing. He said, if possible, 4 hours a day. For me, that is not possible. I know that. And we'll get to that. When that concept is not doable, he kind of talks a little bit about what is doable, and we should talk about that as well, like down in the comments, in the band app, at the One Thing reading group. You know, what are your ways of blocking off your time, considering what your day-to-day life looks like, that you have found that work for you versus don't work for you. But what he suggests is 4 hours a day. For him, he also tries to block that time as early in the day as possible. He says if you finish what you need to regarding your one thing, then ask the focusing question again and again as you work through the other things that need to get done in that day. But his whole point of doing this early in the day is making sure that you knock out the tasks that you need to get done for your one thing first. Give that the priority, the one thing, and then you can get to the other things. And he says blocking off your planning time. During that planning time, you should reflect on where you are and where you want to go. He says yearly, toward the end of the year, assess your someday and your 5-year goals. Then weekly, he says to set aside about an hour, review your annual and your monthly goals. So what needs to happen this month to stay on target for your annual goals, and what needs to happen this week to stay on target for your monthly goals, and then block off those times in your calendar. I don't know about you guys, but that's kind of what I do when I'm planning every week, right? And then every month, and then each year. But he says the kind of the key to having this work is that your time block is sacred. They are really easy to schedule, time blocks, super easy to schedule, really hard to maintain. He says to treat them as if they can't be moved. So as far as what is under your control, if you have blocked off a time block and then something schedule-wise comes up, if you can not schedule that thing during when you have scheduled your time block, he said defend that time block, do so. Schedule the other thing for another time. And he says, quote, until my one thing is done, everything else is a distraction. And our biggest challenge in getting this time blocking idea down pat might be our own need to do other things instead of the one thing. So it might not even be outside distractions or outside schedule issues or, you know, kids at the door or, you know, whatever the case may be. It might be our own need to constantly make sure that everything is getting done, right? Which isn't possible. We talked about that in the intro. But he does say, you know, when you're sitting there working on your one thing, it's going to happen. Things will randomly pop in your head. Oh, I need to add whatever to the grocery list. Jot it down and move on. You know, jot those random things down, get them out of your head so they are not in the way and taking up bandwidth when you should be focusing that bandwidth on working on your one thing. He also suggests doing a brain dump maybe before you sit down for that time block, or maybe the first part of that time block is you doing a brain dump and trying to get all of the randomness out on paper and out of the way so that you can focus as much as possible on what you're supposed to be doing during that time block for your one thing. And I love this. He talks about battling distractions and defending your time block like building a bunker. So number 1 is build a bunker. Work where there are as few distractions as possible. Number 2, store provisions. So any materials you need, any supporting materials you may need, any technology you may need, like if you need your laptop to work on it, any snacks, drinks, only leave for the bathroom. Number 3, sweep for minds. Turn off your phone, shut off your email, close your browser, focus, right? And number 4, enlist support. Tell those most likely to seek you out what you're doing and when you'll next be available. Now I have found as my kids have gotten older that has started to work. Liam is 8 now, and even with him, I could be like, okay, listen, I need to work on this. It's not for 4 hours. I need to work on this for 20 minutes or half an hour. I make sure he's set, he's got a snack, he has 1 or 2 things to do. He's usually still in the room with me, and then I can work. Or I'll have one of the older kids, hey, I need an hour. Let's say I need an hour to do whatever. Watch him, and then later on we'll do this together, that kind of thing. So, but that enlisting support I found, at least around these parts, is a big deal. So in summary, he says, number 1, connect the dots. Purpose creates clarity to dictate your priorities. Number 2, time block your one thing. And number 3, protect the time block at all costs. Those are pretty straightforward. Chapter 16 is the 3 commitments. He says extraordinary results through time blocking requires 3 things. 1, follow the path to mastery. So he says mastery is a path, not a destination. He says, quote, giving the best you have to become the best you can be at your most important work. That's mastery. Mastery tracks with hours invested. So the more time you put toward mastering something, the more you are mastering it. If you guys are at all familiar with the idea of 10,000 hours of doing something to have mastered it, that's basically what this is saying. the interesting thing is mastering one thing kind of boosts you toward mastering the next thing you decide to pursue, all right? It's kind of, even if it's a completely unrelated thing that you're wanting to master, the process and the territory are a lot the same, right? The things you do, the process, the mindset is the same because you've already been there once. That is huge. Number 2, he says move from E to P. E is entrepreneurial, P is purposeful. So he says master something not only by doing the best you can do at it, but also doing it the best it can be done. So you want to try to push yourself outside of the best you can do because that's how you grow, right? You want to stretch. He says being entrepreneurial is kind of how we all get up in the morning, right? We see something that we want to do or that needs to be done, and we kind of just race off to do it with whatever natural abilities we have, and kind of we can tend to ignore the fact that natural abilities have a limit, right? So he says looking at something in a purposeful way, that challenges that ceiling of natural abilities. It challenges the ceiling of achievement. It looks for new approaches, okay? So you don't want to limit your thinking. He says a different result requires doing something different. I'm sure that's something we've all heard, right? So you're thinking, you know, differently than you normally would have looking at the same type of problem or task. And he said again, at theonething.com/shatter, that's where you can kind of push through that ceiling of achievement. They've got a lot of worksheets and stuff there to help you kind of change your mindset toward that. He says somebody who is only thinking in an entrepreneurial way kind of reaches a plateau and you call that good enough. Well, that's the best I can do, so that's the best I can do, and that's kind of it. Somebody who's thinking in a purposeful way looks for different options to push through that plateau and then uses their focusing question to choose the one thing of those options to try and do. And then number 3 is live the accountability cycle. So your actions determine your outcomes, and your outcomes inform your actions. It's a huge cycle. And he said one of the key things he had to learn was not holding anyone but himself responsible for outcomes. If you only hold yourself responsible for outcomes, especially the negative ones, that helps you kind of take setbacks as they come, absorb them, learn from them, but then keep going because you're not wasting time and energy putting the blame somewhere else or on someone else or whatever the case may be. If things happen and you own them and learn from them and move on, that's how you truly learn with a capital L, is by owning the outcomes of things. It's the idea of accepting reality and working with it rather than fighting it. Fighting it is just wasted energy in every respect. So, but if you own the outcomes and learn from them, then next time you're going to have much better outcomes. That's part of learning, is screwing up, right? So the summary for this chapter is number 1, commit to be your best. Number 2, be purposeful about your one thing. Move from entrepreneurial to purposeful. Number 3, take ownership of your outcomes. And number 4, find an accountability partner and or coach. And that's what he talks about, being accountable. Sometimes it does really, really help to have an accountability partner in any area, because then you are accountable to someone other than yourself, right? It's easy to talk yourself out of doing stuff, but when you know you're gonna have to tell somebody else you didn't get it done, like when I'm late with these videos. You guys have no idea how bad I feel when these are late. Chapter 17 is the 4 thieves. He said there are 4 thieves of productivity. 1 is the inability to say no. 2, fear of chaos. 3, poor health habits. Or 4, your environment doesn't support your goals. Number 1 is a big one, I'm sure, for a ton of us, is the inability to say no. And I'm extremely, extremely guilty of this. I struggle with this to this day. I probably always will. I'm better about it than I used to be, but nowhere where I would like to be. One thing that does help, and he reiterates it in the book, is when you say yes to something, you have to really fully understand, by saying yes, what are you saying no to? Because if you're saying yes to do one thing, you are saying no to doing probably a whole bunch of other things, because time and energy are finite. So you really need to acknowledge and think through saying yes to this. What am I really saying no to, and do I want to say no to those things? Are those things too important for me to say no to? Saying yes to your one thing is a top priority. He does go into a little bit about, you can say no in a way that kind of works for everyone. Okay, so he goes, there are ways, like, wait, if I know I can't say yes to what you're doing, if I need to keep my yes for working on my one thing, so I can't say yes to you, I have to tell you no. What can I do to at least help you out is kind of the way I read it. I can ask you some questions and see if, there may be another resource other than me that would be more helpful than I would be anyway. Maybe suggest another approach that might not require anybody's help, that might not even take up as much of their time and energy either. Finding a way to redirect their requests to others. So you're still being helpful. Because that's part of saying no that's just really tough, is I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to not come through for people. I don't, but at the same time, we have to learn to say no to some things, right? So how can I do it while still being helpful so that that person can also get done what they need to get done? That way it's mutually beneficial, right? So the way he does it when it comes to his one thing is he is really hardcore about it, and he says a request must be connected to my one thing for me to consider doing it. If this request is not somehow connected to my one thing, I will absolutely say no, and I will try to find a way to redirect them in another direction. And he points out that, and I know for me this is true, saying no I always felt like it made me the bad guy, or it made me a recluse, or it made me give off the impression that I didn't want to help anybody or work with others or anything, and that is far from the truth at all. A lot of times when I say no to things, honestly, it's just because of here. It's just because we have a big family, there's a lot going on, and sometimes things come up with a big family. It's more likely to things coming up that need your direct attention, so I do have to say no. And that kind of helped me get better at saying no, but I still want to say no in a helpful way, if that makes sense. But saying no does give you freedom and flexibility. Just because the word no is negative, it's not an affirmative yes, it's a negative no, that doesn't mean it exactly is a negative outcome. It does allow you the freedom to pursue your one thing, and it does allow you flexibility. It doesn't make you mean, it doesn't make you difficult. Number 2 of the 4 thieves is the fear of chaos. And boy, do I know this one. When you're working on your one thing, and we've talked about this before, if I'm focusing on this, that means stuff is piling up over here. It's usually kids bickering and laundry and dishes, and all those other things are piling up over here because I'm not doing them. I'm doing this, and I can only be in one place at once, right? I only have a finite amount of time and energy, right? So working on your one thing, as he puts it, is going to cause untidiness, unrest, disorder, chaos, especially while you're working during your time block. Right? So if I'm here, all this other stuff is piling up around me. And we have to get comfortable with that. We have to be willing to allow for chaos and just be creative in dealing with it, right? So he says, put your time block wherever in your day your life allows. Trade time with others so that you can have your time block and then they can have theirs, if that's the case. But he says, try really hard not to be a victim of your circumstances. Well, I can't do that because I have kids at home, so I just can't do it. Honestly, if I block time off to do something, like I said, it's maybe 20 minutes, maybe, and that's it. I have to go through a couple of hoops to get stuff like this done and not have it be a ton of noise in the background, really distracting. Number 3 of the 4 thieves is poor health habits. So he talks about honoring the time that you've scheduled for rest. Remember we talked about time blocking? Your time off should be the first thing you schedule, because pursuing your one thing is going to require energy. So he talks about a lot of things that we're all familiar with, but maybe not too good at doing, like meditating, eating well, exercising, getting your 10,000 steps in before the day is done, and reminding yourself why you're pursuing the one thing by spending time with those you love. Because if you're living with purpose, hopefully all of that kind of ties in together, and doing the things that help boost your motivation is going to help you be more effective in pursuing your one thing. And this part I worded a little differently than he put it in the book, but I said honor your planner. So honoring your planner is knowing what you need to do, making the time to do it. Because when you know what you need to do and you make the time to do it and you get it done, you actually are left with a lot. It's a little bit of a boost. It can be mentally taxing because you're working, but it can also boost you as well. And like I've told you guys many times before, my planner is my surrogate brain. My planner is set up in a way that when I get a chance to work, I know exactly what I need to work on. I know exactly where I need to be when, and I know exactly what I need to do to get that work done so that I don't have to spend any amount of time dilly-dallying around. I can drill right down and get directly to work and not waste any of that time block. And he also talks about sleeping well and meditating, exercising, having a good breakfast in the morning, especially when you spend your early hours of your day kind of energizing yourself, he says he's found he gets pulled through the rest of the day with little additional effort. Number 4 of the time thieves is your environment doesn't support your goals. Attitude thieves can rob you of your energy and resolve, which is true, right? If you are surrounded by people who are really unsupportive or really negative, you kind of start to get dragged down into that with them. Being around supportive people creates, quote, a positive spiral of success. So he talks about, again, your time block and your bunker that you built, and people in place being key. The people around you and where you have that bunker, where you make that time block happen, how important that is. So in summary, number 1 is start saying no. Number 2 is accept chaos. Number 3, manage your energy. And 4, take ownership of your environment. And chapter 18 is called The Journey. So this is kind of reiterating a lot of things we've talked about throughout the entire book so far. So he talks about thinking big but going small. That is a huge idea throughout the book. Think big, go small. Make a habit of thinking big, because that eliminates self-limiting thoughts and behaviors, right? If you develop a habit of constantly thinking big, it becomes easier and easier to do the more you do it. Focusing small simplifies your thinking and highlights just what you have to do next. And that is all on the way to the big thing, but you can't get there without doing these small things to get there. So he says, think big, and then look at your options, narrow them down, line up your priorities, and do what matters most. Because at any moment in time, there can only be one thing, right? You can't have 2 one things. There can only be one. And then he talks a little bit about the kind of life you want to lead. If you're going to live with purpose when you get toward the end of your life, whether or not you want to have the pile of woulda, coulda, shouldas and no regrets, right? So he tells a really cute anecdote. I hope you guys read through it. I won't reiterate it here, but it's about a little boy putting a puzzle together. And he says, if you put yourself together, the world falls into place. So living with purpose, knowing your priorities, and being productive to achieve them kind of puts you together. When you're more put together, your outlook can become very different, and then everything around you kind of falls into place, because when challenges come, you're handling them through a completely different filter. Okay? So that is part 3 of The One Thing by Gary Keller. I can't believe we're almost done. I hope you guys are enjoying it. Again, I'll put all the links to everything down below. Please keep posting your ideas and what you're doing for One Book July. Make sure you tag everything with the hashtag One Book July 2020, and I will talk to you guys soon to wrap up the book. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.